So thank you very much, everyone. It's a huge honor to be in Austin. It's my first time in Austin, and I was really happy to get this invitation, and I'm happy to see what feels like a mix of folks here, from students and professors and different walks of life, I guess. I also wanted to thank Paloma very much for all of her help. She's been amazing over the past few months. Obviously, Lydia Benson for bringing us, and also thank you to all the people who are doing interpretation. So, as mentioned, my name is Dawn Paley. I am a journalist by training. I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada, and I wrote a book called Drug War Capitalism. And as folks know, the title of the conference is Derechos and Crisis, Refugees, Migrant Detention, and Authoritarian Neoliberalism. I'm super excited over the next couple days to learn a lot about the refugees and the migrant detention part, because it's something I know way less about. And I think, I don't know, I kind of assume my role here is to talk about the authoritarian neoliberalism piece. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that a little bit in the context of Central America. So I don't want to over-determine the U.S. role in the current crisis, the ongoing crisis in Central America, but honestly it seems hard not to. There are obviously many local factors to what is going on in Central America, the structural causes of the expulsion of people from Central America, like elites who refuse to pay taxes and high levels of state corruption. But I think it is important to recognize that the crisis of refugees, of violence and extreme inequality in Central America, that crisis, the roots of that crisis are here in the United States. They're in United States policies. The roots are in the U.S. military intervention in Honduras in 1924, and Washington's support for Central American dictators and militaries during most of the 20th century. The roots are in the United Fruit Company, which built its own railways and controlled huge swaths of land in Central America, refusing to pay taxes. For decades, United Fruit had more power in the region than anyone else, and the full backing of the U.S. government. The roots are in the U.S.-backed coup in Guatemala in 1954, an event which would create the conditions for the country's 36-year internal conflict. The roots are in the estimated $9 billion of military aid to repressive regimes in Central America in the 1980s, regimes that massacred and disappeared hundreds of thousands of people and turned many more into refugees. The roots are in the austerity and privatization that accompanied the peace processes in Central America, promoted by the International Monetary Fund and others. In Guatemala, for example, the peace accords, which were signed in 1996, opened up the country for foreign direct investment in a whole new way. The roots, and I'm talking about the roots of today's crisis, I think all of these things are leading us up to where we are. The roots are in the export of violent street gangs from U.S. prisons. Should I stand up? So I'm just going through some of the roots. This feels a lot better now. I feel like I can see people. So the roots of this crisis are in the export of street gangs from U.S. prisons to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, because of Bill Clinton's policy of double punishment. The roots are in the Obama administration's blind eye, and later his administration's support of the 2009 coup d'etat in Honduras. And I don't think the impact of that coup can be underestimated when we're talking about Central America today. Now, obviously, I just went pretty quick through a bunch of stuff, and I changed locations as well. But I wanted to just put out some kind of broad strokes, some big ideas in terms of the deadly roots of U.S. assistance, U.S. aid to Central America over the last century. So I work more on the drug war, and I'm going to focus the presentation really in the last 10 years or so, and the new discourse that has justified U.S. intervention in Central America, and that is the war on drugs. So in Central America, the main vehicle for U.S. drug war policy has been the Central American Regional Security Initiative. This is since 2010. Now, originally, the Central America Regional Security Initiative, which is also called CARSI, was part of the Merida Initiative. The Merida Initiative is the U.S. drug war program in Mexico. the Merit Initiative is based on Plan Colombia. So first you have Plan Colombia in 2000, then you have the Merit Initiative, which is kicking off about 2008, and CARSI, the Central America Specific Initiative, splits off in 2010. So in Central America, CARSI has been the vehicle for what I have called drug war capitalism. And I wanted to briefly outline what I mean by drug war capitalism. Basically, the gist, the elevator pitch version of drug war capitalism, is that U.S. comprehensive drug war policy, enshrined in Plan Colombia, enshrined in the Merit Initiative, enshrined in CARSI, is actually not primarily about drugs. That these policies, their main point, their main reason of being, is not about drugs. Rather, these plans respond to the interests of transnational capital. In other words, what these plans do is they help introduce and safeguard authoritarian neoliberalism. So how does this work? I feel like it's kind of a leap sometimes to go from like CARSI and the Merit Initiative to authoritarian neoliberalism in the same breath. In order to break down the main ideas in the book that I wrote, which is called Drug War Capitalism, I usually talk about the 3 Ps of U.S. anti-drug policy south of the U.S.-Mexico border. The 3 Ps are policy, police, and paramilitaries. Policy. This is the least sexy and the least talked about, probably, element of these plans, but I think that it's actually an essential element. One of the key innovations of Plan Colombia was to carry out a transformation of the legal system and a series of policy reforms to encourage foreign direct investment and prepare the country for signing a free trade agreement with the United States. So while Plan Colombia was happening, the Colombian government and the US government were not saying, we're doing this to change your laws, to change your legal system, and to get the country ready for a free trade agreement with the US. Interestingly, they admitted it after, though. So once Plan Colombia had officially ended the first phase of it in 2006, there was this discussion happening among policymakers basically in Washington going, I don't know, we didn't really stop the flow of cocaine. And the backers, the defenders of Plan Colombia were basically going, but we did so much other great stuff. We changed the legal system. They copied it, made a copy of basically the US legal system, which is now what they've done in Mexico as well, and changed a bunch of regulations to provide more security for investors. So on the surface, these policy elements have nothing to do with drug trafficking. They're totally about neoliberalism. They're totally about deepening neoliberalism and about extending structural guarantees to capital in terms of making investments in host economies. But they are an essential part of these plans. Like, it's when you go through what Plan Colombia is, when you go through what the Merit Initiative is, it's all about, there's always a section about the rule of law, and what that has meant in Colombia and in Mexico has been a transformation of the host legal systems in both countries. And the policy piece, again, like, it's not the most newspaper-friendly part of these anti-drug wars, but it's like an essential piece where you go, wait, something else is going on here this is not just about cocaine. The winners of these policy changes are transnational corporations, the oil giants, the big mining companies, the retail giants, the manufacturing sector. In Mexico, and hopefully we'll be able to speak about this more in other sessions, the amount of reforms that have been passed while the country is being terrorized by the violence of the drug war has been incredible. Labor reform, tax reform, telecommunications reform, energy reform is probably the most crucial. Similarly, Colombia's national oil company was also privatized during Plan Colombia. And actually, the new plan in Central America, which is something I want to talk about just to end off here, it's called the Alliance for Prosperity. It's very obvious in that plan, in the Alliance for Prosperity, that there's a lot going on the policy level with the Alliance for Prosperity that has to do with creating the conditions for investment. But I want to get to the Alliance for Prosperity in just a minute. So the first P of drug war capitalism is policy. All these policy changes are happening, some of them funded directly by the US government under the rubric of whatever plan it is, Plan Colombia, the Merit Initiative, CARSI, others happening simultaneously while populations of these different countries are being terrorized by other elements the other two Ps, basically, police and paramilitaries. So the policing piece is probably the most obvious form of U.S. involvement or what the drug war means. In Mexico, it's the Policía Federal, whose numbers went from around 4,000 when Felipe Calderón declared the war on drugs in December of 2006 to over 40,000 today. This is a highly militarized police force. They wear balaclavas, they ride around, or ski masks, I believe you call them. They ride around in the back of trucks, carry automatic weapons. All of them receive at least 1 year of military training. So a highly militarized police force that has jurisdiction over other areas that local police and municipal police could not work in, and being deployed all around the country. So the official story is that there's going to be these new, well-paid, well-trained, uncorrupt security forces that are going to fight drug trafficking. But we do know that there's been one study that's come out, of a statistical analysis showing that where federal police have been deployed in joint operations with soldiers, there has been in 11 out of 12 cases an increase in homicides in those areas. So a direct link between the mobilization of the federal police in Mexico and an increase in violence. And I think that's another piece that we need to talk about. Certainly with Ayotzinapa in Mexico, it was like Fue el Estado became the cry of many people denouncing what was happening in Guerrero State, but it's not obviously just Guerrero, it's actually throughout Mexico that you have state forces and specifically militarized forces responsible for some of the worst crimes. In Honduras, you have the Tigres, and if you are curious about the Tigres, the Wall Street Journal just put out a video. It's a 3-minute long video. They embedded with the Tigres, and they basically, it looks like, if you've ever seen like a video of what U.S. troops do in Iraq, that's what they're doing in poor neighborhoods in Tegucigalpa, going and kicking people's doors down, pulling everyone out of the house in the middle of the night, etc., terrorizing people. These are U.S. trained forces, and always, under the, we need Tigres, we need better police officers to stop drug trafficking. Obviously, these forces also play a role in terms of protecting capital. I feel like that's a pretty straightforward argument to make. So these are the same police forces that will guard against strikes, that will prevent, campesinos from making a blockade if need be, clear the road, etc. So they're also structurally providing physical guarantees for the ongoing and actually increased or amplified space occupied by transnational capital throughout Mexico, the extractive industries, for example. And it's actually interesting in the language of the Merida Initiative and CARSI that what authorities talk about doing with the drug trade is that they don't talk about stopping the drug trade, and they don't actually, in Plan Colombia, they talked about reducing the amount of cocaine. In the Merida Initiative and in CARSI in Central America, the actual language they use is disrupt. And so when they disrupt a trafficking route, that means the trafficking route goes somewhere else. And the war expands. And the State Department has admitted over and over again that they'll say it themselves. Like, well, there used to be drug traffickers in this region, and now they're over there because we had success in Region A. So now they're in Region B. So now we need to go to Region B and then move them into Region C, et cetera. This is what's happening as it has moved. Basically, the U.S. focus has moved from Colombia to Mexico and now Central America and also the Caribbean. There's also a Caribbean Basin Regional Security Initiative, a very similar initiative to CARSI. But that moving around of drug trafficking routes is partially where the third P comes in, which is paramilitary. So violence in Mexico, as I'm sure everyone here knows, has experienced a huge increase of homicides, of people who've been disappeared since December of 2006, when the drug war was first declared by Felipe Calderón. So this strategy of disruption, what it did was disrupt in Mexico and in Central America a decades-old business of essentially transporting cocaine and producing and moving opium and marijuana north the U.S.-Mexico border. The question really, I guess, like the kind of analogy I can think of for what that U.S. strategy of disruption means is it's like kicking a hornet's nest to try to get rid of hornets. That's the kind of solution they're applying. So what they do is they send these new police forces that are supposedly better trained and non-corrupt out to block trafficking routes, to stop the movement of different products which historically have been moved by other state forces, by other police forces, by the army, etc. And what the people moving the product do is they defend their roots or they defend their business the way they're able to under a system of prohibition, which is using violence. So trafficking routes, which are also called drug cartels, in the US media and in Mexico and the mainstream media, we're always hearing about drug cartels. They essentially became better armed. They armed themselves more and started using new tactics to defend themselves against this technique of disruption funded by the US and host governments. So there's no doubt that the techniques, the tactics used by these paramilitary groups, by these drug cartels, are based in terror, a use of terror against the population. And it's funny because in the US, I feel like sometimes there's this idea that there's terrorist groups, but I think the reality is that most of the times really the terrorist groups are the state. And I think that's why I like the idea, or I propose in my book, that we talk about paramilitaries and not about drug cartels, because what we see is that these groups that are carrying out these actions of terror against the population are also working very closely often with different state forces. And many of them are often retired or sometimes even currently being paid, like defected kind of police officers and etc. So the big example here again is Ayotzinapa. Municipal police officers in Guerrero did not turn the 43 students they arrested in September of 2014 over to a drug gang. They turned them over to a paramilitary group. Paramilitary groups are defined because they're irregular armed forces that work with state forces, and it's very clear that this is what's happening in different parts of Mexico. Drug cartels are not insurgent forces. Their members often come from state ranks, and their activities can actually benefit or be useful to capital. And this is where we have some hindsight from Colombia. It's extremely useful in terms of understanding these dynamics. In Colombia, we know that drug-financed paramilitary groups patrolled with the army, they supported Congress people, they eliminated union members, and they cleared territory for transnational corporations, the banana companies Chiquita and Dole, Coca-Cola, the oil giant BP, the mining companies Drummond, and so on. So we know that there can be a symbiotic relationship between these paramilitary groups and transnational, the biggest, most powerful capitalists, essentially, the big ones. So that's basically my summary of drug war capitalism. The challenge is to think about the drug war and not, like people often at my university in Puebla will say, oh, you work on like the drug cartels and the narcos and stuff. And I'm like, no, I work on the state. Like, it's really state policy that I'm talking about. When we talk about the increase in violence in Mexico, it's making the link back to US policy. It's making the link back to this, what the Mexican state is doing. Violence did not surge out of nowhere. It is caused by and also response to state policy. So I'm going to go through really quickly a couple of things just to put it out there on the Alliance for Prosperity, because it's something that people are talking about in the context of Central America, and honestly I have not heard enough critical voices on the Alliance for Prosperity. Folks might know the US just designated $750 million towards their strategy for engagement in Central America this year. And that's going to mean the continuation of CARCI, which I mentioned, the drug war plan, and also something called the Alliance for Prosperity. The Alliance for Prosperity was supposedly written by the presidents of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. It's going to be a big $22 billion plan. And what Washington is claiming is that this is the plan that is going to solve the migrant crisis. It's going to solve the structural causes. People are going to stop coming up to the United States because the Alliance for Prosperity is going to create all of these jobs. The Alliance for Prosperity is Plan Puebla, Panama. That's what it is. It is the same highway projects, the same elite, tapping into certain regions. And mainly, it's actually a large gas pipeline that will go from Salina Cruz, Oaxaca, to Escuintla, Guatemala, that is going to provide a market for many Texan corporations to have somewhere to sell their natural gas, which they are having a very hard time doing right now. So really, the Alliance for Prosperity is a plan to deepen neoliberalism, to deepen neoliberal capitalism in Central America even more, promote more economic integration. And we're seeing this overlaid. I mean, the Alliance for Prosperity has a security component, and CARSI is going on at the same time. So it is essentially like just pushing down more on Central America, pushing more neoliberalism, and through the drug war, unfortunately pushing more violence. So I'm ending now, I'm getting the 0-minute sign. What they're telling us is that the Alliance for Prosperity is going to stem the migration of people and families from Central America. And I think what is our task over the next couple of days and over the next many, many years is to counter that discourse in a meaningful way, really challenge it and push back. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists on how they're doing that. Thank you.